All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I'm working my way through the PowerPoint presentations for Murox ASP.NET 4.6 with C# 2015 6th edition. And I'm about a third the way or so through Chapter 8, which talks about how to work with state, cookies, and URL encoding. We're still on the state part. And as you can see, I'm up to slide 18 out of 58. So they mention here, they talk about a pre-render event. This is the other one that updates an event handler in a cart object. I want to jump up to pages 286 and 287. Talk about the four modes. So these are four different ways that you can store session state data. You can first use in process. That stores the data in IIS, which remember, we're working with a built-in IIS server here. So it stores the data in IIS server memory in the same process as the application. This is the default, but it's only suitable if you're using a single server for an application. You can use state server, and that stores the data in server memory under the control of the ASP.NET State Service, which can be accessed by other IIS servers. So it can be used when an application would be hosted on a web farm. What's a web farm? Well, if you think about a place like Amazon, they don't have just one server because they've got people pinging on them from all over the world. So they've got a lot of servers and a lot of locations that are together, either physically hooked together or hooked together in some other format, and that would be a server farm. You can store using SQL Server, which stores the data in an SQL Server database. This mode is used for applications that require more than one IIS server. It's slower than in process and state server modes, but it's the most reliable. Finally, there's custom, where you can write your own code to do this. The programming requirements for all four of these session state modes are the same. But the state server and the SQL server, all right, the middle two, require objects in session state to be serializable. To make an object or an item serializable, you add the serializable attribute to its class session. And if you don't understand serializable and deserializable, serializable, and I want to make sure because I always am afraid I'm going to give you these backwards. This will work. All right, what is serialization and deserialization? Serialization is the process of going from an in-memory representation of object on a disk to a disk based on a form. That's not a great. All right, let's look at it this way. Let's say you're building a house, okay? And you've got this entire house and it's done and you've made it out of brick. And you decide that you want to move the house. But the house being bricked like this is so heavy that you can't move all of it at one time. So you decide that what you're going to do is you're going to take the house apart brick by brick, move it to where you want it to go, and reassemble it. Taking it apart brick by brick is serialization. Putting it back together again so that it's just one house object. So taking it apart is serialization. Putting it back together again is deserialization. All right? I think I got that right. Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much with it. If I did, I guess I'm apologizing in advance. People always ask, well, with stuff like that, do I have to know this? And it's virtually impossible to answer a question like that because who knows what kind of an application or whatever you're going to be working on. All right, options for tracking session IDs. You can use cookie-based tracking, and you can use cookie-less tracking. Well, what's a cookie? Not, again, no jokes. Not a cookie you'd eat, but what is a session cookie? Cookies, by their very nature, are small text files. They're not executable files. They're small text files, usually with a maximum size of about 4K or 4,000 bytes. So cookies are small text files that get written from the server to the browser, and they're stored on the browser. A lot of people think that cookies are evil, and they store all, and they're executable files, and they'll remove everything on my system. No, they're not. They're not executable files. They're very small files. All right. It is possible for you, as a user, to go into your internet settings and turn cookies off. Then you would use what's called cookieless session IDs. That's more dangerous because if you do that, the session ID gets passed in the query string. Remember what the query string is. So if I come through here, let's go to Rankin. All right, and under here, let's go to why choose Rankin. Find your career path. Let's go to information technology. That's not what I want. Let's see, can I... Oh, what do we got here? Let's try something else. All right, I'm in CNN.com. Going here. Whenever I want to show something, I'm not able to do a good job of finding what it is I want to show you. Let's see. I know what I'll do. Let's go out to Amazon. I've got nothing in my cart. Let's go out to books. And let's type in ASP.net. All right. And you'll notice once I do that, it'll find, it says 12 results. So let's grab, come on. Let's go grab this one. All right. So what do I have here? Well, my URL is actually this stuff right here. That's the URL. Okay? In fact, if I grab just that information that's right there, copy it to the clipboard, paste it in and hit enter, I'm right where I was. So what is this other stuff that's in there? This is information. This is the query string. This says that I'm in books, and my keyword is ASP.net is what I'm looking at, etc. This is some kind of a query ID, but the point is that this information right here that's shown right in the address bar, that's a query string, and if you use cookieless session IDs, that's where that information is stored. So it would not be impossible or inconceivable for somebody to be able to grab that information from you and look at it as it's going over the internet. Attributes of session state element in web.config. There is mode, which can be off, in process, which is the default, state server, SQL server, or custom. In other words, it can be off or any one of these four values. Cookieless, which, use cookies is the default. And cookieless means that you're not using cookies. Timeout is how long the session should be maintained. So if the user stops working with it, how long should the session remain active? The default, I believe, is 20 minutes. States connection string is the server name or the IP address and port number of the server that runs the ASP.NET State service. SQL connection string is a connection string for the instance of SQL Server with a database that's going to store all this session information. An always custom SQL database is a Boolean or true-false value that determines if the SQL connection string can specify the name of the database used to store the information. So this is web.config, so you'd store it in something like this. In contrast to session state, remember that stores data for a single user session, you can use application state and caching to let you store data that's stored by all users of an application. So that's what's going to be discussed here next. In ASP.NET, notice an application is defined as a collection of pages, code, and other files within a single directory on a web server. An application begins when the user first requests a page that's part of the app. As part of its initialization, ASP.NET creates an application object, an application state object, and a cache object. These objects exist for the duration of the application. Once the app is started, it normally doesn't end until the web server is shut down. If you've never heard before of cache, this is computer cache. C-A-C-H-E. Items stored in cache don't necessarily stay in server memory until the app ends. When something is cached, it usually stays in memory for a while. For instance, if I go out here and let's say I go out to CNN.com, boom. All right, and it's going to load, boom, it's going to go out and load CNN.com in. All right. And now I come in and I'm going to close this and I'm going to go into CNN.com again and hit enter. Probably what happened is the system didn't go back to the CNN server and grab that. Since it was so fast, what it did was it cached or copied basically what it needed from CNN.com into memory, and it grabbed it from there. Why? Because that's a lot faster. Now that explanation was not a great one, but hopefully it made a little bit of sense. Application state concepts are shown here. This is all the material. These 3 slides are what are shown on page 288 and 289 in the book. So for application state concepts, as it says, items stored in application state objects stay in server memory until they're removed or the application ends. This is most appropriate for storing small items of data that change as the app executes. To make sure an application object is not accessed by more than one user at a time, you typically will lock it. Very similar to the kind of stuff that you do when you are working with a database. All right, the stuff you see here presents details for working with application state and cache state data. This first table that you see right here shows the members that are common to both classes. So both classes here have a name, which is the value of this name, the item with a specified name. So it grabs it if it exists, and it creates it if it doesn't exist. Count, which are the number of items in the collection. Add to add an item to a collection, and remove to remove an item from a collection. The cache class, all right, so this second table here shows a method specific to the cache class. It's the insert method, which adds an item to the cache collection. Here, we've got the common methods, the ones common to the HTTP application state class. We've got clear, which removes all items from the state collection. Lock, which locks the state application state collection so only the current user can access it. And unlock, that unlocks it so other users can access it. There are some code examples shown here on the bottom of page 291. If you're thinking to yourself, my gosh, Jeff, is this a dry chapter? That's only because it is. All right, this is the kind of thing that, again, if you are working with ASP.NET as your back end for creating some kind of an online store, this is the kind of stuff you'd have to be concerned with. So they show here two statements that add items to an application state in cache and two more that retrieve it. To retrieve it, it's on the right-hand side of an equal sign. To set it, you don't have to put an equal sign in there, you just use the add method. Here's two statements that retrieve an item from a non-page class. Here's a statement that adds an item to cache with an absolute expiration timeline. Now this starts to get into talking about application events. And as mentioned here and are shown on 292 and 293 in the book, they talk about the common application events. The first is application start, and that event is raised when the first page of an application is requested by a user. Typically, it's used to initialize values of application state items. Application end is when the application is about to terminate. You might use it to write these values to a database or out to a file, so they have permanent storage. Session start, which is raised when the user session begins. It's typically used to initialize session state items, update application state items, or authorize access. And session end, which is used when a session is about to terminate, to free resources up. Now, when you start to work with this stuff, you start to use a file to work with these events. You first add a global.asax file to a project. All right, and how do you do that? Well, one way that you can do that is you can come in here, and as we've seen before, you can right mouse click on the name of the project, choose add new item, and one of the ones in here, I believe, is an ASAX file. Let's look. Let's go down to the bottom and work our way up. I was pretty sure at least you were able to do it this way. Let's see what, I'm not using the book right now. I was just trying to do it off the top of my own head here. And I could be wrong, as I oftentimes am. Well, they show how you can do this in code in the textbook on page 293. And they mention that on the bottom of the page, two ways to add a global ASAX file to your app. First, right mouse click, that's what I did, add new items, then select global application class in the web general section. Okay, so, again, I'm trying to be complete here. They're saying right mouse click the project and select add item. So we already did that, add new item. Then it says here there should be a web general section in here. And of course, I don't see it. We could just keep arrowing our way through here, but one of these should give you an ASAX file. global.asax file provides event handlers for application events, including when the app starts, when it ends, and when a session starts and ends. The same things that we just talked about. All right. I think I'm going to stop right here. And we're going into a little bit of a new topic, how to use cookies and URL encoding. We've got about 12 pages left in the chapter. So I'm going to stop here and pick it up in just a couple minutes.